Ladies and gentlemen, tech news is very much full of AMD's Threadripper and Intel's Basin Falls, also known as X299 platform. Specifically with Intel, of course, most folks are focused on Skylake-x, with Skylake-x seen as a rather puzzling addition to the lineup. These processors will be released over 3 different separate release dates. One is June 26th, the second is sometime in August, and the third, the latest one, is in October. So as of the time I'm recording this is about 10 days into the future. But 2 different websites, bittech.net and also hexus.net, have managed to grab hold of early samples of these products for review, specifically on the i9-7900X. Results, we now have a clear indication of how these processors will perform. Or do we? My name's Paul, and in this RegGaming.com video, we're going to be investigating these benchmarks and also cautioning you that maybe you should wait until we have a wider gamut of reviews before making your final decision. And with all of that said, let's just jump into it. So, the 7900X is a 10-core, 20-thread processor. Of course, Skylake-x does have a few distinctive differences between it and Broadwell-E. One of the most obvious is the differences with the cache architecture, or shall I say hierarchy. With just 13.75 megabytes of level 3 cache, but there is a positive to this. We have seen a 4-fold increase for level 2 cache from 256 kilobytes per core all the way up to 1 megabyte per core for the i9-7900X. We're going to be going through both sets of benchmarks from both websites, and of course this is going to be a mixture of gaming, video editing, and some synthetics and other bits and bobs as well. Starting things out, we have Handbrake, which is video transcoding, 4K MKV to high quality 1080p. In this instance, Bittech have actually put in a couple of results. One is overclocked and one is stock, and you can quite clearly see the results. Unsurprisingly, yes, it is faster than Ryzen, even overclocked. After all, it does have a couple of additional cores, and also takes out the 6950X. Cinebench from Hexus also shows a rather dominant performance of the 7900X, absolutely crushing all other processors in its wake that are listed. We can see that the 7900X absolutely crushes even the 6950X, despite the fact that they still have the same number of cores and threads, so obviously the new architecture is making a rather large difference here. Rather handily, Bittech also have results of a Cinebench R15, both single and multi-thread, and as predicted, the 7900X absolutely comes on top. Now what, to me, is the take-home here is that you'll notice the 7900X offers really nice single-thread performance. So this is a case where you don't really need to make a choice between great single-thread performance and great multi-thread performance. This processor does offer a nice mixture of both. But things start to get a bit more complex. The VRMark benchmark on Orange Room shows a score of 10,191, which is not too bad, right? However, Hexus actually point out that initially their score was just over 4,000. So that's way over double what they initially managed to wrangle out, and all this is all thanks to a BIOS update. Gaming benchmarks look very similar to what you'd expect. For example, Hitman at 1440p, it does score just about the highest result, but obviously they are using a GTX 1080 card, so they might start running into the card actually being GPU bound at that type of resolution. Another example of weirdness is Ashes of the Singularity Escalation. They ran a DirectX 12 CPU test with high settings, and the 6950X managed, by the way, running at 4.4 GHz, manages an average of 65 FPS, whereas the 7900X hits just 54. Before I give my final thoughts, I do want to also point out some overclocking information. So they do say that it's very much similar to Broadwell-E in terms of overclocking. You can basically just raise the multiplier, set a V-core voltage, and basically you're good. However, temperatures do start becoming an issue if you're hitting the upper echelons of what the processor can do. In fact, they managed to hit over 100 degrees when they clocked the CPU to 4.7 gigahertz. And this isn't on a standard air cooler or anything like that. They were using a 240mm AIO cooler. Hexus.net, however, got different results. Their chip supposedly was a good one. Their words, not mine, excuse me. They hit 4.7 gigahertz across all 10 cores, and they managed to do this with only 1.2 volts to make this happen. But once again, they said the moment they started to increase the voltage or try and increase the clock speed further, temperatures became a major issue. It didn't matter what cooler they were using. So, what's my take on all of this? Well, I feel that there's a couple of things. Firstly, the BIOSes are likely not ready yet. So, the problem I have with these reviews being published early is I don't feel necessarily they should be labeled as review. I feel they should be labeled as preview, because when the CPUs are launched to the public, in other words when they're available, like let's say by 26th, 27th, there may be a new BIOS available which improves performance a little bit and possibly helps to stabilize voltages, power consumption, and, well, let's just be honest here, heat. With that all said, this is a very expensive processor. It's around $1,000 US. That's only for the CPU. That's not including the motherboard, the RAM, or, well, anything else. So that's a large investment. I personally would say that even if the reviews came back on the 26th and they said that this processor was the best thing ever, I would still suggest waiting for Threadripper reviews, because quite frankly, you might end up with a better deal, or it might cause Intel to lower their pricing a little bit, you never know. I wouldn't also be surprised if these processors don't perform necessarily better, or at least noticeably better, for some time than their predecessors, especially if they're running at around the same clock speed. Now, this is primarily due to software. Quite frankly, it's down to us, that is the community, to really start testing these chips out and to say, hey, this chip does really well in this specific application, because obviously this specific application really likes a healthy amount of level 2 cache. In other words, lower latency, definitely. Of course, there is always the distinct possibility that in 3 or 4 months' time, real-world performance of the X299 platform isn't much better than what we're seeing here in these early results. After all, if you were to take a look at Ryzen and how it's increasing in performance with various BIOS updates. After all, we all know that the very early revisions of the Ryzen BIOSes weren't exactly bug-free, and that's to say the least. And now that we're on Agasa 10.08, we're definitely starting to notice better memory support, improved performance, reliability, particularly in different boot situations, and perhaps most important of all, software developers are releasing patches for their products which are improving performance. So perhaps that's also something that we will need to look forward to in the future, as developers become increasingly confident that they can target CPUs with a ever larger number of cores, now that Intel are slowly, very slowly, moving away from the 4-core mandate that they've been locked in for a number of years now. Personally, I think that the X299 platform is really nice, with the exceptions I've said about multiple times before. For example, the fact that some chips, especially the Kaby Lake chips, basically really hamstring the platform to the point where it's almost pointless to buy it. It looks like it has pretty damn nice IPC. Overclocking performance is not too bad at all. In fact, when you factor in the sheer number of processors, or rather the processor cores, that are simply squidged into this little package, it actually is pretty impressive. Now, I'd be interested to see if this overclocking headroom is going to remain consistent throughout multiple different processors, which feature a higher number of cores. For example, the 7980XE features 18 cores, 36 threads, and obviously Intel have not confirmed clock speeds and that type of stuff at the moment, because we can presume they're still trying to tweak this stuff to figure out what they can possibly get out of the chip, you know, and kind of guarantee it for customers. With all of that said, I do think this is a nice set of processors. I do think this is a nice platform. It is, however, rather expensive, especially if you compare it to what Ryzen's Threadripper is supposedly going to be costing, and obviously that's only a rumor. It's going to cost around $800, maybe $900 US for a 16-core 32-thread. 16-core 32-thread part, which is very impressive indeed. And obviously that is cheaper than the 7900X, but we can presume at least the 7900X has higher clock speeds and other bits and pieces, so it might end up being kind of swings and roundabouts in some areas. Like, do you want to pay the extra money, get better single core performance, higher clock speeds, or would you rather save the dosh? And it's a bit weird. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.